Welcome to Sri Lanka at 99.94. We speak cricket. I am Mark Machado from the Murali end, and my co-host is Estelle Vasudevan from the Papare. We're your home for Sri Lanka content, and we will be right here several times every week discussing them. You can find us in your favourite podcast places on YouTube or in our 99.94 app. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation. Today, we are talking about the big hitting skipper, Dasun Shanaka. Estelle, firstly, have you got over your Asia Cup hangover yet?
Well, I can't say I have. It's still kind of, fresh, almost unbelievable still, because you look at everything we've been through and we've seen how this team has performed over the last couple of years, and to kind of think we just beat the best teams in Asia and comfortably in the end. So yeah, still going on. I think I would like that feeling to last. You never know what's going to happen in the next couple of months with Sri Lanka cricket. So yep.
Obviously, I'm in London, so I didn't get to experience it, but I saw the scenes when the boys got back and the parade that they went on, and it looked incredible. And, it was one of those moments where I really felt like I was missing out being over here, especially as, of course, in the UK, we're all in a somber mood at the moment, but we don't need to go into that. Right, let's talk about Dasun Shanaka, right, because he takes over the captaincy after the Durham incident last year. But Estelle, I want you to take us back to the kind of early part of his career, because I know the Papare does a lot of work on schoolboy cricket in Sri Lanka, which is, if you don't know, it's absolutely massive. And wherever there are Sri Lankans in the world, there'll be people keeping an eye on the fortunes of their school. Was Dasun Shanaka somebody who came through that system and was much heralded like other players have been in the past, or did he kind of manage to get through it with little fanfare?
Yeah, there isn't much, to look back on in terms of his school career. I think one of the reasons for that is that he wasn't from one of the bigger Colombo schools. He's from Negombo, I think, Maristella, if I'm not mistaken. So one of the schools that doesn't get that much attention in terms of schools cricket. They are very good school in terms of other sports. They've got a lot of, in athletics, in football, stuff like that. But so that may have been one of the reasons. But I think his rise in the domestic arena is what really caught the selectors' eyes. I recall maybe around 2014 to 2016, he hit 100 for SSC in a T20 competition, a domestic competition, where he hit 14, 15 sixes. Not entirely sure of the exact numbers, but that was an incredible knock. And I think that was a time when Sri Lanka has always been on the lookout for these big hitters, right? Because it's not something that you find very often in Sri Lanka. So there were a lot of hopes. I'd say for me, the very first time that I kind of thought, okay, this guy, he could be something for Sri Lanka, was in 2016, in the 2016 World T20. I think Sri Lanka were knocked out in a game against England. And I think Shanaka batted at 8, 9, somewhere around there. I think at that point, everybody was thinking that he's a bowling all-rounder, when actually he'd made his name for himself in domestic cricket as a batter who bowled a little bit. Anyway, in that game, he had Angelo Matthews on the other end, and Sri Lanka were chasing 170 odd. And it wasn't, like I mentioned, Sri Lanka got knocked out in that game, but the way Shanaka played, the options he had in those death overs, I think he made 15 of 8 or 9 deliveries. That was really good to see from a Sri Lankan batter, something that we hadn't seen in a long time. Those latter order batters who can really, play proper shots and clear the ropes. So not someone who caught the eye in schools cricket, but I think from his 20s, he's definitely been impressive in the domestic arena.
When he was given the captaincy, and we'll talk about exactly how that happened in a bit later on in the show, but when he was given the captaincy, I remember thinking he wasn't necessarily making everyone's Sri Lanka 11 when they were putting their best T20 side together. I suspect though a lot of that is because of the of as people learn to adapt to modern T20 tactics, they don't necessarily realise that actually if you bat and lower down the order, it's not so much about keeping your wicket; it's more about maintaining a high strike rate, right? And well, this isn't, I don't think, a problem specific for Sri Lanka, but I think this is a wider cricketing issue in general, where a lot of the cricket watching public don't realise the role that you play if you bat in 5, 6, 7, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when he was made captain, a lot of people, as you mentioned, were kind of questioning it, because did he make the team on merit, or was he just kind of in there because he is captain? And as you mentioned, that role that he plays, it's, I think, a mistake we made with Thisara Pereira as well, where people or selection committees were expecting him to make runs in every game. Shanaka plays a very similar role. I would say Shanaka is a more technically sound batter than Thisara Pereira, but um, that there were people talking about how he's similar to Darren Sammy. Sammy didn't get to play much of a role in terms with either bat or ball in that great West Indian era, but he was a superb captain, and he kind of inspired that team into great heights. I suppose very similar to what's happening to Sri Lanka right now, where they didn't have a lot going for them, but they made it work with what they had. So Shanaka, in that sense, it did come at a time where people were thinking like that. But I think now there's, I suppose you can say that in the last year, he's definitely grown into that role, even as a captain, as well as a batter. And, you know, we've spoken about this before as well, about tactics and stuff like that, where people don't see him as one of the most tactical captains out there. But I mean, he's made it work over the last year.
Yeah, I remember if we go back to the India series, which I think when India came over to Sri Lanka last year, which I think was his first series as captain, they in the kind of middle there was Hasaranga, Shanaka, and Charmaka, and I think there was a lot of questions about kind of what exactly are those the two seamers in that trio kind of there for in terms of they seem to be batting quite high up, but we thought they were kind of more bowlers. I mean, at some point we'll probably talk about Charmaka as well, because his career has been interesting as well. But I think people felt that maybe we should have dropped one of those two and picked a specialist batter instead. But actually, as you mentioned, the last 12 months, his batting's grown. His ability seems to have come on quite a lot. I'm not sure whether that was something he always had in him, or if it's just a case of he needed someone to show the confidence in him and needed to know that he wasn't going to get dropped. Because if you go back to when he first started coming into the side in 2015, 2016, when the side was under a lot of flux, and SLC seemed to be going through a period of if you played if you didn't do well in one match, then it won't, not just you won't drop for the next game, but you're possibly out of the squad. And you might not get another sniff at it. And I think we saw an era of Sri Lankan cricket where people were quite panicked. He's obviously come through that, and then we've seen, for me, his kind of obviously he was there when we hit winning runs through the Asia Cup run, but I think his standout innings was against Australia, right, in Sri Lanka, when he hit 59 of the last 3 overs, which was just an incredible knock, right?
Yeah, I was there. It was crazy. I'm telling you, I started writing the match report. Sri Lanka lose by whatever. And then every time I looked up, the ball is flying past the press box. It was just an incredible knock. I think what changed things for Sri Lanka was also that knock, because at that game, Australia dominated 37 overs of that match. Sri Lanka were not in that game. And then out of nowhere, Shanaka just he went berserk. And that's the type of innings I was telling you about, where in the domestic arena, that's the type of innings he's been known to play. He's got hundreds in T20 cricket, I believe more than 3. So that's what he's known for. And suddenly we were seeing it at the international level. Still at that point, like you said, a lot of people, spoke about, it's just one knock, he's not consistent or whatever. But I think that really turned a corner for not only for him, but for the team as well, where, you know, all of a sudden chasing 30 to 40 of the last three is not impossible for this team. It was, I think, 18 months ago, it would have been really, really tough. But that's no longer the case. So I think that knock really switched things for him in his mind, his belief in himself as well as the team.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. I think we're going to have to talk about Durham in a moment again, but around that time as they were going into that India series, I just felt chasing anything above 7 or 8 runs and over was too much for this side, and the games were out of reach too quickly. 99.94 is more than just a podcast. Jared Kimber has Red Inca and Double Century, one show that talks about the modern global game and the other that is a deep dive into our sports history. And Double Century will now appear weekly, but there's also our expanding network on teams, England, South Africa, India, and the West Indies. If you want to find them, the best way to follow us is on social media at 9994DM, downloading our app, or Google 99.94 podcast. Also, while we're at it, if you're listening, please do drop us a review. I've got to be sly about the way I do this, but me and Estelle are in a massive kind of, I don't want to say feud, I think that's a bit strong, but there's a lot of competition between the 99.94 pods to see who can get the most reviews and who could get the most interaction from people. So if you listen to Sri Lanka on 99.94, please drop us a review, tell your friends, pass it on. The more interaction we can get from you guys, send us a tweet. I'm at Mark Machado. Estelle, what's your Twitter handle?
It's Estelle Vasudevan.
There, exactly. If you find me, you can find her, and if you find her, you can find me, and you can all find us at 99.94 at 99.94 DM as well. Get in touch with us. We love to hear from you and love your feedback about what we're talking about, and maybe you can even tell us what you want us to look into in future episodes. We're talking about Dasun Shanaka today, Estelle. Let's talk about how he got his captaincy, because there's a lot of hearsay and rumours in Colombo about how this happened. Would you want to tell us what you think happened?
Well, I'm not going to tell you what I think happened, but I'll tell you what the rumor is. The rumor was that apparently Kusal Janit Pereira was relieved of his captaincy duties after the tour of England. Sri Lanka cricket had some difficulty getting players to sign on their contracts because there was some payment reviews, and I think there was a new system brought in by Tom Moody where it was more performance-based. So there were a few players who were unhappy about it. The rumor is that a lot of senior players were not willing to sign, and that pressure was kind of keeping the youngsters away from signing as well. So apparently, Dasun Shanaka had kind of approached SLC and told them, look, I'll get the youngsters to sign if you give me the captaincy. And that's apparently how it happened. So again, this is a rumor. This is not, I don't have first-hand knowledge about it. Just something that was floating around at that point. But I mean, if it did happen, I really don't have any problems with it right now, because I mean, sometimes in an environment like Sri Lanka cricket, you kind of have to be a shark. You have to kind of grab whatever opportunities that you can. So if it really did happen, then yeah, I don't see, I mean, there's no way you can fault him for it now.
There's two things I think need to be said. That firstly, if you don't follow Sri Lankan cricket, you might not know this. If you don't follow it closely, you might not know this. It is perfectly normal for there to be contract disputes between players and the board in Sri Lankan cricket. It happened several times in the noughties. It happened, I think, on the eve of the 2011 World Cup, possibly? And it happened almost, I think, within a few weeks of Sri Lanka winning the actual World Cup in '96 for the first time. I'm ticking all my Sri Lanka cricket bingo boxes here, 96 World Cup, Durham, everything, right? And secondly, sometimes things. The other thing you got to remember about Sri Lankan cricket, which is quite unique to Sri Lanka compared to the other nations around them, is that to borrow a phrase from our colleagues in the West Indies at 99.94, the big bag for these players. No, in fact, I'll rephrase that. The only bag for these players is the contract from SLC, right? Playing domestic cricket in Sri Lanka isn't a well-paid job, and the only way really to break out of that system traditionally is to try, is to get exposure and play international cricket, and hopefully that leads you on to playing franchise games, right? Which is why getting that central contract is much more important for those players than it would be for some of the other players, right? In other parts of the world, it's not a massive deal. Though that said, we are starting to see a few players who kind of broken through the system via the IPL, as in IPL teams have come and scattered them and brought them on as net bowlers and whatever, right? So maybe that's something that will change over time. And again, Estelle, to tack onto what you say to the end, Sri Lankan cricket, if you're going to be brutal about it, can be quite wild. The fact that this rumor is out there, and if it is true or isn't true, I think it kind of adds to the mythos of him, because I think as a captain, he's kind of underrated, right? I think they were, we talked about in previous episodes, we talked about how they probably should have done a bit better at the World Cup, in the T20 World Cup in 2021, and they were a bit naive. But actually, you look at the way that they got out of certain situations in the last 6 months, particularly after Chris Silverwood's taken over, and you're like, the tactics around it have come on loads. You look at that first over, where the first ball went for 10 runs, and he jumps in straight away and he's talking to the bowler and he calms the whole situation down. I think actually he's probably more tactically astute than people like to give him credit for, right?
Yeah, I think you can say that, but also I think his captaincy has come a long way in the last 6 months. Like you mentioned, there were times during that India series where you didn't know who was in control in the middle of the pitch, because there were messages coming in from outside. There were like huge conferences between the players in the middle. But if you look at the Asia Cup, I suppose you could also say that when things are going good, everything looks good, right? But I would say his captaincy has come a long way in terms of maturity. I think something that I've loved seeing from him during the Asia Cup is actually his press conferences, where he's tackling a few touchy subjects. I know he mentioned about supporting other sports, which is really important for someone like, I mean, it's really big for someone like of Shanaka's stature to talk about something like that. He also spoke about giving players the freedom to have their own lives, have fun, enjoy themselves outside, which is something that I'm sure this isn't only Sri Lanka, but a lot of players like Kusal Mendis, Niroshan Dikwala, they get a lot of flack from fans because of what they post on their social media handles or what they do during their free time. So I think the way he's handled those things shows a lot of maturity. So I would say his captaincy and that role he's really grown into in the last 6 months or so.
Love cricket and want to hear more? Well, head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all our podcasts and our commentary. We're adding new shows and covering series all the time. The best way to follow us is via our app or on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation. And as I said earlier, remember to get those reviews in on the Sri Lanka at 99.94 page, wherever you get your apps from. We want your reviews. Thank you. Estelle, I want to finish up this episode by comparing him to a Sri Lankan great. And I think I mentioned it off air that I was going to do this. And I won't say you physically recoiled, but I could see you going, oh my God, I don't know where Jared's found this guy from, but he's absolutely nuts. I want to compare him to Arjuna Ranatunga, right? Because I think they both kind of come into the team. Well, actually, their routes into the team are quite different, right? But they end up taking over sides that aren't particularly well fancied, that everyone's kind of written off. I remember after the Durham incident, and I can't believe how much we talk about Durham on this show. there was people in the British press saying that basically England shouldn't consider playing Sri Lanka for a long time until they've gone away and rejigged the system and got a competitive team about, and people saying this is the end of Sri Lankan cricket. Of course, if you're a Sri Lanka fan, you knew that was all nonsense. But it did show, it did demonstrate what people thought of the team. And actually, he's turned them, under his watch. I don't know if you could say he's turned them or how much influence he's had. Sri Lanka have become competitive again. I don't want to say they're well beaters, but I think playing Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka is going to be a hard task for anyone. I don't think, going into this T20 World Cup, I don't think many teams will want to play them. I don't think they're the pushover that they were, 18 months or even a year ago. And he's galvanised them. And I think weirdly that Asia Cup win, and actually in the grand scheme of stuff that Sri Lanka have won over the years, winning another Asia Cup isn't statistically that big a deal, but it feels so momentous. It feels so massive. I think he's brought that pride back, or the pride has returned into the shirt under his watch. And that I think is something he's got to, we've got to rate, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, there have been 6 Sri Lankan captains who lift an Asia Cup. And he's one of them, right? Mahela Jayawardena, Sanath Jayasuriya, Mavanatapattu, Arjuna Ranatunga, Tulip Mendis, and Dasun Shanaka. So he's already in amongst great company. So I remember during Mickey Arthur's time with Sri Lanka, there was a lot of talk about fearless cricket, playing fearless cricket, because Sri Lanka has that identity, right? That is the Sri Lankan brand of cricket is fearless cricket. But we didn't see that until the last, let's say, 6 to 8 months, where you lose 5 wickets within the first 10 overs and your batters are still attacking the ball. They're going for runs. They're not looking to bat out the 20 overs. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. And they've mentioned it as well at press conferences, in interviews, talking about wanting to bring back that brand of Sri Lankan cricket. So I think the freedom that Shanaka has given the players to do that, like you said, you can't really say it's just him or, laid all on him, but he obviously has an influence on what happens on the field and outside, right? And that freedom he's given the other players, the likes of Bhanuka Rajapaksa, who I think the pair of them are quite close as well because they are of similar ages and they played together quite a lot. That freedom he's given those players is why we are seeing success now. We're no longer, a team that kind of closes up shop as soon as a few wickets goes. We used to see, your top player is out. Okay, now, there's no way we are going to win this, so let's try to bat out the 20 overs or whatever. We used to see that kind of attitude before, but we're not seeing that anymore. And I think some of that credit at least needs to go to Dasun Shanaka. I still don't think I don't think anybody can say he's the most tactically brilliant captain in world cricket or the most tactically brilliant captain Sri Lanka cricket has ever seen. But I think he's grown in that role, and the changes, the little kind of attitude changes that he has brought into the side is what is bringing us success right now.
I really hope at some point he ends up playing in the IPL and the other big franchise leagues, because I think he strikes me as a person who learns a lot from other people, and I think he'd learn a lot from there. And I do wonder if, I'm due in Sri Lanka in December, and I wonder if wherever I go, I'll be seeing kids wearing, the arm, the I don't know what it is, the arms, the sleeves that he wears. If all the other kids are doing that, but the thing that I admire most about Dasun Shanaka is I don't think he ever gets people to do anything he wouldn't do. I've seen him, score winning runs and take all the triumph. And I've also seen him bowl really difficult overs at difficult moments in the game, when essentially he's having to try and protect his other more younger players, right, from being hit by big hitters from Australia or whoever else they're playing. And I think that's, in an era where everyone seems to be obsessed by stats, that's an admirable thing to do, right?
Yeah, and we saw that during the game against India, actually, where Asitha Fernando went for plenty of runs in his first 2 overs. Shanaka takes the ball, and you're coming up against some really big hitters, right? Surya Kumar Yadav was batting with Rohit Sharma at that point, I believe. And he took on that responsibility, knowing that he's the sixth bowler option Sri Lanka had, and he managed to get a wicket. He maybe should have had two more. He got one more, but there was a bit of a controversial no ball call, denied him of a wicket. But I think that's the thing about good captains, right? They're willing to take that kind of risk, or that's the thing about good leaders. They're willing to take that risk. If he'd gone for 35, 40 of those 2 overs, everybody's going to come back and say, look, you have a frontline bowler. Why did you bowl that death over? But you have to take those risks, right? When they come off, everyone's praising you. When they don't, and I think that's what I was alluding to before as well. His maturity is in that I feel that he understands the kind of how fickle the fan base is also. You make a decision, it goes right, everyone's talking about how great you are as a captain, and I mean, even we are talking about him, right? But if some of those decisions, some of those calls had gone wrong, then it's all going to go the other way. So to stand firm in those kind of things, I think he's shown that he's that type of person in the last few months.
Let's leave it there, and let's hope that Dasun Shanaka has a lot more success as Sri Lanka captain in the coming months. Thanks for listening to Sri Lanka and 99.94 Cricket. Please rate, review and subscribe. Download the 99.94 app and follow us on Twitter. You can search for me, Mark Machado, or you can search for Estelle Devon, and we'll both pop up. We love to hear from you. We'll put links up for everything we do there on this podcast and beyond. And also follow the network at 99.94 DM on social media. Follow for podcast and commentary from the bat and ball world. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation.